right, so I'm talking about the first quarter moon in Scorpio of 27 July 2020, and there's a lot here. I want to start off by saying that Scorpio is a fixed water sign, and what that means is that it's unchanging. We think of fixed signs as signs that are stable in the element. It's a sustained release of that elemental energy. Water can be emotion, it can be fecund because water produces life, and so you're looking at a sign with Scorpio that's unchanging in its emotional fecundity. After the solstice, the sun starts dying in terms of the days getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And then by the time you get to Scorpio, things are really dying because the sun, not only are the days shortening in length, but the night is a lot longer than the day. Astrologer Dan Rudger talks about Scorpio, this exact feature of Scorpio, that man loves the light because we need vegetation. We need animal life to survive. And so as those things begin to die in Scorpio, there can be this kind of resentment energy or this angry energy that's just unconsciously built up in human beings. And I like here he talks about how when the leaves turn red, red is the color of Mars, but leaves die, they fall off the trees, things get barren. That is the Scorpionic energy. Roman astrologer Vettius Valens talks about Scorpio being the house of Mars, ruled by Mars, but there's a destructive feature and it's a destroyer of property. And I think that that's where this signification comes in, is that Mars is known as a destroyer of property, but during this Scorpionic phase or this Scorpio phase of the sun's cycle through the ecliptic, you do have a destruction of this life, of the fecundity of life. And I think that there's a spiritual significance to this. There's a natural cycle of creation and destruction that we find in nature, right? Even think about your own life. You build something up, whether that's a career or a relationship, but there is a phase where that thing then comes to its natural end. And there's a period of decay and atrophy and loss, and then we adjust to that, right? But these are natural, healthy, normal cycles. I mean, if things weren't ever destroyed, you wouldn't have the kind of efficiency that you have in like modern cities, right? You tear down old buildings and you build new buildings. I like to go to Ptolemy here as well, book 4 of the Tetrabiblos. And this is chapter 10, he discusses the periodical divisions of time, where he divides a life into these segments that are ruled by certain planets. But the first phase is ruled by the moon, and it's when we're nourished, right? I think when you're a child and a baby, you have this kind of rapid change, but then you're nourished by the family and the home and that structure that protects you until you're ready for adulthood. So nourishment is a key factor of the moon. And Mars, he says, is the 5th age, and that's the age of manhood, where you have austerity in life, right? You're responsible for yourself. You have self-support. Think about putting a baby just out into the world, or like a 5-year-old, say, fend for yourself. It's not going to work very well. So Mars wants action. Mars wants separation. And the moon is all about nurturing and home and the changes that come about when we're nurtured and cared for. There's these kind of opposite or opposed natures of the two planets. The moon in Scorpio, we say that the moon is fallen there. It's because the needs of those planets are at odds with each other. And this is one of my favorite Scorpio moon anecdotes. This is from Rolling Stone. It was an article written in the 70s, shortly after the Altamont disaster. And there was a journalist at Altamont writing about this big music festival that they had. It was the Woodstock of the West. This was in Oakland. And here's the article. As Santana was setting up, someone towards the front of the stage was telling her, man, quote, it's weird. They consulted astrologers before setting the dates for Woodstock, but they couldn't have consulted astrologer about today. Anyone can see with the moon in Scorpio, today's an awful day. So this was before, as Altamont was happening, right? And what happened on Altamont is that 4 people were killed. And so you have that feature of death, and the Hells Angels were involved in a murder. It's just one of my favorite anecdotes about like the Scorpio moon, how difficult it can be. And as electional astrologers, we don't really touch the moon in Scorpio in terms of elections, or very rarely. There's special cases, but most of the time when the moon is fallen in a difficult place in the zodiac, we like to just lay low. So let's look at this first quarter moon chart, and you can see there the moon's at 4 degrees of Scorpio, or 5 Scorpio, squaring the sun. So the moon is gaining in light. This is that first quarter moon. The moon's growing, but it's under pressure because the moon's in Scorpio. Now there's a nice trine from Mercury in Cancer overcoming the moon, and I think that part of what this chart tells me is that we have to bathe our bodies and bathe ourselves with this in positive self-talk. You know, the Mercury in Cancer is ruled by the moon. So maybe how we talk about ourselves and to ourselves is really kind of a hidden mitigation in this chart. Mercury is also closely applying to a square with Mars overcoming from Aries. And so these, we've got to really watch the words that we're throwing around and the images and the mercurial things we're doing, because this martial sharpness and separation could bleed into our language. And so I think that Mars in Aries here is also taking the lead in the sky. Mars now finally disposes of 4 of the 7 traditional planets when the moon's in Scorpio. So this Mars in Aries transit for us is really settling in now and getting into a groove. Where's Aries in your natal chart? What house is it affecting? You contemplate that. What is Mars doing well in that natal house? So for example, if you have Mars in the 11th, maybe you're taking action with friendships, maybe you're kind of separating out certain friendships and moving into others. And we saw in the news, this was on the 23rd of July, Britain and the US accused Russia of launching a weapon in space. This is the kind of geopolitical contention that I think can emerge. New technology, that's Mercury, it's a new projectile that can threaten satellites. They're saying Russia will threaten the peaceful use of space, right? Mars is war. Mercury actually signifies preparations or planning for war. And you see these kind of technological innovations and this sort of arms race or discourse about an arms race in the media. Really not surprising at all. But we have our own personal arms race, right? Maybe you're in a conflict with someone and you're building up your strategies or your arguments. I think it's good to have forethought and good to have kind of pre-planning if you're going to be in a potentially contentious exchange. This is from a collection called In Other Words. It was published by Routledge in 2012. This is one of the essays from Pratibha Parma. Her essay in this collection is called Words as Weapons. And I just want to read here, this is from the opening paragraph. She says, words are weapons for liberation, and that writing is a crucial form of action. It's ultimately a weapon for liberation, right? Everything has got to be about liberation of the soul in the present moment, or with these larger cycles of liberation and liberatory action. But writing is a crucial form of action. And this is textbook, because in our ancient texts, Mercury is writing, Mars is action. There's 4 aspects I want to look at during the next lunar quarter, and we'll hit them one by one here. But first is Mars square Mercury on the 27th of July. Next is Venus conjoining the fixed star Capella on 29 July. On 30 July, Mercury will oppose Jupiter. And then on 3 August, Mercury will conjoin the fixed star Procyon. So first, Mercury square Mars. I've talked a lot about that already, because that's, I think, the striking feature of this astrological moment. A couple other thoughts on that. So this is the chart when Mercury squares Mars on the 27th of July. Mercury is in its own Egyptian term, but Mars is in Mercury's Egyptian term. And I think this provides great mitigation because Mars has to answer to Mercury, right? Mars is in a part of the zodiac that Mercury rules. And so while Mars is squaring Mercury, it's relying upon Mercury for the action that it wants to take. If you are relying on someone, you're not going to punish them too hard if you have a superior position with respect to that person. So I think there's an exchange here that's actually quite useful between Mars and Mercury. And like I said before, we can use words as weapons. We can have strategy around the language we're using to kind of separate things out and to confront things that need to be confronted. 1941 is a real analogous year to this year because we had these 3 passes with Mercury squaring Mars and right in the same zone of the zodiac. So it's very, very analogous and similar. And both of those years, again, had the triple pass with only 2 of the passes, the last 2 being in the Cancer, Aries, cardinal positioning. If you look at 1941 in July, so this is July 26, 1941, the aspect perfected on the 25th. The big news was that U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt ordered the seizure of all Japanese assets in the United States. And this was a buildup for the fireworks that happened later in 1941 after Mars had gone direct. And so I'm just looking here, what kind of hints can we glean from this pattern? And the one big thing that happened this week, the Chinese consulate in Houston was ordered closed by the United States government. And there was this big drama there about a fire and there were burning documents potentially, but the closure that has been ordered is, to me, what's this analogous kind of throwback to 1941. Now, it's not as severe as seizing assets. That's a huge, huge thing. And I've already gone on record thinking that there's some big mitigations for this Mars retrograde in Aries because of Saturn's position in Capricorn, that I don't think the explosiveness will be quite the same as 1941, but it's an echo. So next aspect, Venus conjunct Capella. This is a 22 Gemini. Venus is still in Gemini. Boy, it's been forever, hasn't it? Venus retrograded in Gemini, stationing retrograde and direct, both in Gemini this year. We're almost through that transit. Communication related to love and pleasure, but using that technology and the internet, that is Gemini. Use the technological innovation available to us for these Venusian things. Even things like throwing on your headphones and getting a playlist from an online streaming service. This Capella conjunction happens right near that north node. Remember, things get wonky when around the north node, right? This is an eclipse point. Maybe your communications are going to get a little haywire, or signals are going to get crossed. So just watch for that. Remember that Capella, and this is ropes in the fixed stars and constellations and astrology, it's this goat that was then used to nurse Jupiter, the milk of that goat. And so there's this real nurturance feature with Capella. Ptolemy says it's the nature of Mars and Mercury. So again, we have another Mars and Mercury. And I like when Robeson says here, with Venus, Capella can bring literary and poetical ability. And again, that's that mercurial feature. I wanted to say here, there's an article from the Irish Times. This came out in the 23rd of July. Do Poets and Philosophers Speak the Same Language by Joe Humphreys. And in the article, he talks about Bertrand Russell acknowledged that verse can illuminate and inform in a special way. And Bertrand Russell wrote about this poet Henry Vaughan, who was writing poetry about the nature of eternity. Henry Vaughan wrote, "A vast shadow moved in which the world and all her train were hurled." And he meditated, Bertrand Russell, that this was capable of expressing reason and deep and profound belief systems. And that's what I think here. The poetry gives us access to deep truths. Poetical contemplation can open up these deeper truths for us. And, because Mars is so heavily featured in the skies right now, again, I want to go back to this idea of transmuting rage, destroying falsehood, and using the poetical to go into these kind of deeper recesses of truth. The other thing, this was a New Statesman article from 21 July, why poetry is enjoying a renaissance. And it just says here, lockdown produced a rare time for reflection, but also for writing. When Venus hits Capella, I think it really gives us another jolt of that energetic, of this poetic energetic. All right, Mercury will oppose Jupiter 30 July 2020. This is at 20 degrees Cancer and 20 degrees Capricorn. The metaphor I'm thinking here is a parent scolding a child, because Jupiter here is under pressure in Capricorn and fall, restricted by Saturn. But it's still responsible for Mercury, because Mercury is transiting through the term of Jupiter in Cancer. And so it's one of those things where, like, the child's in your face maybe, but you can't be too oppressive, right? You have to treat the child with love, because that's the job of the parent. And I think that Mars is applying to a square to Jupiter here, which will also influence maybe a tendency to snap that I think we can watch. But the bigger tension is the big picture feature of Jupiter versus that detailed analysis of Mercury. And how will those two things coalesce? And again, I think poetry could be part of that, because if you've written poetry, you edit and you fine tune, and that's an extremely mercurial and tedious process, but the final end of the piece might be this very Jupiterian insight. And the last time that Mercury opposed Jupiter in these same degrees, 20 Cancer, 20 Cap, was in 1842. And the story that I found that really, I think, rings true as a metaphor for this moment is James Naismith patented the steel hammer in the UK in June of 1842. He ended up retiring at the age of 48, so something like very Jupiter, you might think, all of the money, the ability to retire. But remember, Mercury's legal paperwork. And so he had to bring that mercurial fine-tuning to protect the new asset, that maybe Jupiterian new idea that was going to give him so much profit. Next aspect and final aspect. This is August 3rd, or 3 August. Mercury will conjoin the fixed star Procyon. And Robeson writes about Procyon, it's of the nature of Mercury and Mars. So again, we have all this Mercury and Mars this lunar quarter as they complete their third past square with each other. But remember that this is the lesser dog. This is Canis minor. And you think about those little dogs, they can be really bark heavy. They can tend to just kind of yap at the drop of a pen or when they see someone new. It's this defense mechanism. And that's great Mercury Mars, right? Using the language, using the voice as a kind of defense mechanism. So watch that. Watch being easily angered as Mars passes over this Procyon conjunction at 26 Cancer. The book Hermes on the Fixed Stars from the Renaissance tells us that this actually can give great power magically, and with the occult work that we might be doing, that there's Procyon gives men favor of the spirits of the air and gives great power over magic. And so Robeson says that with Mercury, when Procyon conjoins Mercury, there's occult interest. So I think there's an occult feature as well to this, the constellation Monoceros, which is unicorn. And so this Sydney Hall drawing is amazing because the little dog is sitting and riding the unicorn. And that's almost as magical as you get, right? And as occult as you get. This great spiritual, fantastic creature of the unicorn giving a ride to the small dog. The natural significations of Mercury are occult, magic, dreams, and astrology, right? Mercury is now direct. And so I think, again, we have this mercurial power where we can access maybe these hidden features of reality. And this was an article from the New Statesman, Millennial Mysticism, Why Contemporary Poets Are Turning to the Occult. And it was reviewing a new text that had just been published called Spells, 21st Century Occult Poetry. But the idea is that poems are spells. And in this article, there's a discussion about the power of naming things. And the rhythms and repetitions of poetry as being spell-like. And you can even think when you read a poem, you get into that music of the language and the flow of the words, and you can think about chanting. And so thoughts and words are spells. What spells are you casting? How are you using them? How are you using the Mars-Mercury to cast spells, to fight injustice, to separate what needs to be separated? And just be careful with what you're saying and how you're speaking and what you're writing. The moon will be in Scorpio at the start of this lunar quarter, but the moon will leave Libra, where the moon faced this cardinal minefield. The moon is in fallen Scorpio. Sagittarius, when the moon's transiting through Sagittarius, there will be the south node with the moon, kind of draining the moon of power, and ruler Jupiter will be in fallen Capricorn, not making an aspect to the moon. So that's difficult for the moon. When the moon hits Capricorn, there'll be the cardinal minefield part 2. The moon will have to transit through those cardinal planets. And then this is all during the waxing phase of the moon. As the moon's gaining in light and trying to expand, there's this difficulty. The transit I wanted to highlight, the moon is going to be moving right here in the first few days of August through Capricorn. Maybe we can rely on our ability to cope with austerity as a way to kind of basically, we need to let go of nurturance, let go of abundance, and say, all right, austerity's here, hard boundaries are here. Let me use that to my advantage. And remember, the moon is a trigger. So watch what happens now to get a better sense of your story for the second half of the year, because as the moon triggers up, every time the moon hits Capricorn and Aries, this principle is operative when the moon hits Cancer and Libra. We're triggering this cardinal energy. And this is going to be here again. We're now in July, but this really doesn't dissipate until December. This story is setting in. So watch, start working with it, because the work you do now and the awareness and consciousness you bring now to each of these transits is going to help with the decisions you're making later in the year. Now, I like to go to the Rider-Waite-Smith Tarot. The art of Pamela Coleman Smith in this deck is almost unrivaled. We're probably the most influential tarot deck in our current epoch, even though there's so much new work out there that's also lovely. But the moon is associated with the high priestess. So a priestess is working with energies, triggering energies through prayer, through ritual. And then the moon card itself is associated with Pisces. But on the moon card, you have these dogs and this wolf. They're looking at the moon and really howling. And so, again, the moon is a trigger. Worth noting here, as the moon is triggering up that Mars, Mercury, once the moon is in Capricorn, it's going to trigger these words that we've hopefully been strategically planning and carefully ordering. If you have to do something, you're forced to take action. I think really waiting for the moon to get to Aquarius is a good idea, because the moon will be nearly full, so chock full of power and really large in the sky. And the fixed air sign Aquarius is not involved in that cardinal pileup. So the moon will have support from a strong ruler, and that the moon will make no hard aspect to the malefics, and Venus will trine the moon from Gemini. So it's an inferior trine from Venus that the moon will receive, but still you have that benefic Venus sending back some good energy to the moon in Aquarius. And so this is the moment. If you got to act here, wait, plan, do something now during this time. This is August 3rd, and then we'll hit the full moon. But I still think this is a better time to act than any other time in this lunar quarter that I'm examining. It's fixed, so it's time to settle. And then the woman in the star card pours out that healing water all over the earth. And so this is a time to get settled, get connected to the gods, but with Saturn being really close to the divine, and use this moon as a trigger to really just kind of pour out your goodness into reality, whether that's in your immediate space or those around you. So I always love saying that when we're discussing Aquarius. There's this kind of profound transcendent ability here. Cartomancy pull. This is the structure card, the Four of Clubs, and this is the Venus decan in Aries. This is the last decan of Aries. And I think about structure, when we have our creative fire, which is the fire sign, our passion, are the light that we carry within, really the light of our awareness and consciousness, the great fire that the fire within, you might say. How does Venus work in Aries with that? Well, Venus, we know is an exile in Aries in terms of the essential dignity scheme. But still, how can we use our fire to maybe ground or to support the material pleasures that Venus wants, the kind of relational stability and the adornment that Venus requires? And that can often be difficult because the fire of passion is really a dynamic energetic that doesn't necessarily need the structure that Venus does need. But I think here with Venus coming into play, these are the questions. How can we structure our room, for example? Do you need to put up a painting? How about a necklace? What kind of structure can you bring to your adornment or your grooming rhythms as a way to support the fire? Because it's inevitable that we have to engage in fire. We have to go out into the world, meet people, have new relationships, and that can be challenging and uncomfortable. But if there's maybe rhythm or structure in how we prepare for that in terms of our routines and our spaces, then I think it can support the fire in this kind of hidden way. So as always, you can book a donation-based astrology reading with me, Astrology for All, sjanderson144.com. I look forward to reading for you. This audio is on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, other podcast players, and you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram at sjanderson144.